The worst part about my 39th birthday party wasn't that my wife forgot to buy candles. It wasn't that she invited her boss instead of my brother. It wasn't even that she spent the entire evening flashing her new push-up bra at said boss while I stood in the corner like a piece of furniture. No, the worst part was that I saw it coming from 3 months away. My name is Simon Callahan, and I work in IT security for a mid-sized insurance company in Salem, Massachusetts. I spend my days protecting other people's data from hackers, cheaters, and liars. The irony wasn't lost on me that I couldn't protect my own marriage from the same. "Simon, honey, come meet Damian properly," Julia called from across our living room, her voice pitched in that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, the kind that cost more than my monthly car payment. Damian Sutter stood next to her like he owned the place. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's rent. He was the creative director at Morrison & Associates, the advertising agency where Julia worked as an account manager. At least that's what her business card said. "Simon," Damian extended his hand with the kind of smile that made me think of used car salesmen. "Julia talks about you constantly." "I'll bet she does," I thought, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, practiced, the kind of handshake that said, "I'm better than you, and we both know it." "All good things, I hope," I replied, matching his fake smile with one of my own. Julia laughed, that high-pitched giggle she'd developed recently. "Oh, you know how it is. I tell him he works too much, stays in that basement office too long." "A man needs his hobbies," Damian said, glancing around our modest living room. His eyes lingered on the worn couch, the outdated entertainment center, the family photos on the mantel that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Though I imagine a beautiful woman like Julia deserves more attention than a computer screen can provide. The comment hung in the air like smoke. Julia blushed, actually blushed, while I stood there wondering if I should laugh or throw him out. Instead, I took a long sip of my beer and counted to 10. "You're absolutely right," I said finally. "Julia deserves a lot of things." Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, from next door, chose that moment to approach with a plate of her famous brownies. "Simon, dear, happy birthday. 39, isn't it? My goodness, where does the time go?" "Thanks, Mrs. Patterson. These look amazing." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She beamed, then lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but your wife looks absolutely radiant tonight. That dress is stunning. Isn't it?" Julia preened, doing a little turn. "Damian helped me pick it out. He has such wonderful taste." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows shot up slightly, but she recovered quickly. "How thoughtful of him." I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of an anthropologist studying a particularly interesting tribe. In the 3 months since I'd first suspected Julia was cheating, I'd become an expert at reading between the lines. Mrs. Patterson's reaction told me everything I needed to know about how this looked to the outside world. "Simon," my friend Greg appeared at my elbow, holding 2 beers. "Great party, man. Really festive." Greg worked with me at the insurance company. He was one of those guys who could make a joke out of anything, but right now he looked uncomfortable. His eyes kept darting between Julia and Damian, who were now standing close enough to share body heat. "Thanks for coming," I said, accepting the beer. "How's the new apartment working out?" "Good, good. Nice to have my own space again after the divorce." He paused, then added quietly, "Listen, if you ever need to talk—" "I'm fine," I said, but I appreciated the offer. Greg had been through his own marriage troubles 2 years ago. He knew the signs. Across the room, Julia was laughing at something Damian had whispered in her ear. Her hand was on his arm, fingers lingering just a moment too long. I'd seen this routine before, but never quite so publicly. "Julia," I called out, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Could you help me in the kitchen for a minute?" She looked annoyed at the interruption, but came over anyway. "What is it, Simon? We have guests." "I noticed we're running low on ice. Could you grab some from the garage freezer?" "Can't it wait? I was having an important conversation with Damian about the Morrison account." "I'll bet you were," I thought. "It'll just take a second." She sighed dramatically. "Fine, but make it quick." As she headed toward the garage, I noticed Damian watching her walk away. His expression was hungry, possessive, like he was already planning his next move. "Interesting guy," Greg said, following my gaze. "Very," I agreed. "The kind of guy who takes what he wants." "And what does he want?" I finished my beer in one long swallow. "Everything." The party continued for another 2 hours. I played the gracious host, thanked people for coming, pretended not to notice when Julia disappeared for 20 minutes, and came back with her lipstick smudged. Damian left shortly after, but not before making a show of kissing Julia's cheek goodbye. "Such a lovely evening," he said to me as he headed for the door. "You're a lucky man, Simon." "I know exactly how lucky I am," I replied. After the last guest left, Julia and I cleaned up in silence. She was humming under her breath, some tune I didn't recognize. She seemed happier than I'd seen her in months. "That went well," she said finally, loading glasses into the dishwasher. "Did it?" "Of course. Everyone had a great time. Damian was so charming, don't you think?" "Charming isn't the word I'd use." She stopped loading dishes and looked at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just tired." "You're always tired lately. Maybe you should see a doctor." I almost laughed. The problem wasn't my health, it was my marriage. But Julia had already moved on, her phone buzzing with a text message. She read it quickly, smiled, then deleted it. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I'd been tracking her phone records for 2 months. The number of texts between her and Damian had tripled in recent weeks, mostly sent late at night or early in the morning. The content was encrypted, but the timing told its own story. "I'm going to bed," she announced. "Don't stay up too late in that office of yours." She kissed my cheek, the same spot where Damian had kissed hers, then headed upstairs. I heard her moving around in our bedroom, the sound of drawers opening and closing, water running in the bathroom. I waited until I heard the bed creak, then went down to my basement office. It wasn't much to look at. A desk, 2 monitors, a filing cabinet, and a small safe where I kept important documents. But it was my sanctuary, the one place in the house that was entirely mine. I powered up my computer and opened the folder labeled Julia Personal. Inside were 3 months' worth of phone records, credit card statements, and digital surveillance. I'd been building this file methodically, piece by piece, like constructing a puzzle. The phone records showed the obvious. Dozens of calls and texts to Damian's number, often lasting hours. The credit card statements were more interesting. Charges for lingerie, expensive dinners, a hotel room last Tuesday when she'd claimed to be working late. But the real treasure was in the digital surveillance. 3 weeks ago, I'd installed a keylogger on her laptop. Every password, every email, every private message was automatically saved to my secure server. I opened her email account and scrolled through recent messages. Most were work-related, but buried in her deleted items folder was a thread with Damian that made my stomach turn. "Can't wait to see you again," one message read. "Last night was incredible." "Same here," Julia had replied. "But we need to be more careful. Simon's been acting suspicious lately." "Maybe it's time to tell him," Damian had suggested. "We could be together properly." "Not yet. I need to figure out the financial situation first. The house, his retirement account, everything. I'm not walking away empty-handed." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the email program. I'd suspected the affair, but seeing it confirmed in writing was different, more real, more final. But what really bothered me wasn't the cheating itself. It was the calculation behind it. Julia wasn't just having an affair, she was planning an exit strategy. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, and she thought I was too stupid to notice. That was her first mistake. I opened a new document and began typing. At the top of the page, I wrote, Operation Birthday Surprise, Phase 2. If Julia wanted to play games, I was happy to oblige. But she was about to learn that in the world of IT security, the house always wins. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of New England weather that made everything look like a crime scene. I sat in my cubicle at Hartwell Insurance, pretending to review firewall logs while actually planning my wife's downfall. You look terrible, Greg said, appearing at my desk with 2 cups of coffee. Rough weekend? Something like that. I accepted the coffee gratefully. Hey, remember that favor you mentioned at the party? Greg's expression grew serious. What kind of favor? The kind that requires your particular skill set. Before joining Hartwell, Greg had worked for a private investigation firm. He knew how to find information that most people preferred to keep hidden. More importantly, he knew how to do it legally. This about Julia? He asked quietly. Maybe. Simon, man, I like you. You're a good guy. But if you're thinking about doing something stupid, I'm thinking about doing something smart, I interrupted. Something very, very smart. Greg studied my face for a moment, then sat down. What do you need? I pulled up a secure folder on my computer and showed him the evidence I'd compiled. Phone records, credit card statements, email threads. Greg whistled low under his breath. She's not even trying to hide it, he said. Look at these restaurant charges. Same place, same time, every Tuesday for 6 weeks. Le Bernardin, fancy French place downtown. They have private dining rooms. And this hotel charge? The Marriott on State Street. Last Tuesday, room 412. Checked in at 2 p.m., checked out at 6 p.m. Greg leaned back in his chair. So what's the plan? Divorce lawyer? Eventually. But first, I want to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Julia mentioned something about my retirement account in one of these emails. I need to know if she's already started moving money around. That's where I come in? That's where you come in. I need a complete financial background check on both Julia and Damian. Assets, debts, recent transactions, anything that might indicate they're planning something together. Greg nodded slowly. I can do that. Might take a few days, though. These things require finesse. I've got time. Julia thinks I'm clueless. Let her keep thinking that while we gather intelligence. And then? I smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then we give them exactly what they deserve. That evening, I arrived home to find Julia in the kitchen cooking dinner. She was wearing an apron over her work clothes, humming the same tune from Saturday night. The domestic scene would have been touching if I didn't know she was texting her lover while the pasta boiled. How was your day? She asked without looking up. Boring. Firewall updates, security patches. You know how it is. She was focused on her phone, typing rapidly. Damian says the Morrison account is really taking off. We might need to work some late nights this week. I'll bet you will, I thought. That's great, honey. I'm proud of how hard you're working. She glanced up, surprised by the sincerity in my voice. For a moment, she looked almost guilty. Almost. Thanks. I know I've been distracted lately. There's just so much going on at work. I understand. Career comes first, right? Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe, or suspicion. But then her phone buzzed again, and the moment passed. Could you set the table? She asked. Dinner's almost ready. We ate in relative silence, making small talk about work and weekend plans. Julia mentioned that Damian was having a small gathering at his townhouse on Friday. Nothing fancy, just a few people from the office. You should come, she said, but her tone suggested she hoped I wouldn't. Sounds fun. What time? Oh, 7:30. But it's really just work people. You'd probably be bored. I'm sure I can find ways to entertain myself. After dinner, Julia retreated to the living room to watch television while I cleaned up. Her phone was on the counter, charging, and I noticed she'd received several messages in the last hour. All from the same number, Damian's. I made a mental note to check the full conversation later, then joined Julia on the couch. She was watching some reality show about wealthy housewives, completely absorbed in their manufactured drama. "These women are terrible," she said during a commercial break. "All that money, and they still can't find happiness." "Maybe money isn't everything," I suggested. "Easy to say when you don't have any." The comment stung, partly because it was true. My salary at Hartwell was decent, but not spectacular. We lived comfortably, but we weren't wealthy. Julia had always claimed that didn't matter, but lately I'd noticed her paying more attention to expensive things. "Damian drives a BMW," she said suddenly. "Does he?" "A new one. Leather seats, navigation system, the works. He was telling me about it at the party. Says it drives like a dream." I nodded absently, but I was thinking about something else. In my experience, people who talked about their expensive possessions were usually compensating for something. I made another mental note to have Greg dig deeper into Damian's finances. "I'm going downstairs for a while," I announced. "Some work stuff I need to catch up on." "Don't stay up too late," Julia said, but she was already focused on her show again. In my basement office, I opened Julia's email account and found the conversation thread she'd been having with Damian during dinner. The messages were more explicit than usual, discussing not just their next meeting, but specific details about what they planned to do. I closed the email program and opened a new document. Time to start planning Phase 3. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to downtown Salem. Le Bernardin was located in a converted Victorian mansion, the kind of place that charged $50 for an appetizer and made you feel privileged for the opportunity. I parked across the street and waited. At 11:45 a.m., Julia's car pulled into the valet parking area. She was dressed in a business suit, but she'd done something different with her hair. Softer, more romantic. 5 minutes later, Damian arrived in his BMW. He handed the keys to the valet with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never worried about money. He was wearing a dark suit and carrying a small gift bag. They met at the restaurant entrance, and I watched through my telephoto lens as Damian kissed her cheek. His hand lingered on her waist, possessive and familiar. They disappeared inside, and I settled in to wait. 2 hours later, they emerged looking satisfied and slightly rumpled. Damian's tie was loose, and Julia's lipstick had been reapplied. They stood close together on the sidewalk, talking in low voices. I snapped photos of the entire encounter, making sure to capture license plates, time stamps, and clear facial shots. In a divorce proceeding, photographic evidence was worth its weight in gold, but I wasn't planning to use these photos in court. I had something much more creative in mind. That evening, Greg called with preliminary results from his financial investigation. "Interesting stuff," he said. "Your wife has been busy. She opened a new savings account 3 weeks ago, one you're not listed on. She's been transferring small amounts from your joint checking account, nothing big enough to trigger attention, but it adds up." "How much?" "About 8,000 so far. But here's the really interesting part. Damian Sutter is broke." I sat up straighter. "What do you mean broke?" "I mean he's leveraged to the eyeballs. That BMW, leased, the townhouse, second mortgage. He's got credit card debt in 6 figures, and his ex-wife is taking him for alimony payments that would make your eyes water. So he needs money. Desperately. And your wife has access to your retirement account, doesn't she?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "She's listed as the beneficiary, but she can't access it without my signature. Unless something happened to you." The implication hung in the air between us. I'd been thinking about adultery and divorce, but Greg was suggesting something much darker. "You think they're planning something?" I asked. "I think you need to be very careful." Greg replied. And I think you need to move fast. After hanging up, I sat in my basement office staring at the wall. The evidence was mounting, but I still didn't have the complete picture. Julia was stealing money, Damian needed cash, and they were planning some kind of future together. But were they just planning to leave me, or were they planning something worse? I opened my computer and began typing a new document. Operation Birthday Surprise, Phase 4, Insurance Policy. If Julia and Damian wanted to play hardball, I was ready. But first, I needed to make sure I lived long enough to enjoy my revenge. Friday evening arrived with the kind of autumn chill that made you think about mortality. I stood in my bedroom, adjusting my tie and watching Julia apply makeup in our bathroom mirror. She was taking extra care tonight, using expensive cosmetics I didn't remember her buying. "You sure you want to come?" she asked for the third time. "It's really just going to be office politics and shop talk." "I'm looking forward to it," I lied smoothly. "I'd like to see where you work, meet your colleagues properly." Julia's hand paused mid-stroke with her mascara wand. In the mirror, I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to discourage me without seeming suspicious. "Damian's place is pretty small," she said finally. "Might be crowded." "I don't mind crowds." She finished her makeup in silence while I pretended to read emails on my phone. Actually, I was reviewing the surveillance photos from earlier in the week and checking the recording app I'd installed. Tonight was going to be very educational for everyone involved. Damian's townhouse was in the historic district, a narrow 3-story building that probably cost more than most people made in 5 years. Despite his financial problems, he was keeping up appearances well. The windows glowed with warm light, and I could hear laughter and conversation from the street. "Remember," Julia said as we approached the front door, "these are my co-workers. Try to be social." "I'm always social." She gave me a look that suggested she disagreed, then rang the doorbell. Damian answered almost immediately, as if he'd been waiting by the door. He was wearing casual slacks and a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Julia, darling," he said, kissing both her cheeks in that pretentious way people do when they want to seem sophisticated. "And Simon, so glad you could make it." His handshake was firm, but I noticed his eyes didn't quite meet mine. Guilty conscience, maybe, or just general discomfort with the husband of the woman he was sleeping with. The townhouse was exactly what I'd expected, all exposed brick and hardwood floors, with modern art on the walls and furniture that looked expensive but uncomfortable. About 15 people were scattered around the main floor, holding wine glasses and making the kind of small talk that passes for conversation at office parties. "Let me introduce you around," Damian said, steering us toward a group near the fireplace. "Everyone, you remember Julia from the Morrison account, and this is her husband Simon." I shook hands with account executives and creative directors, made polite conversation about my work in IT security, and generally played the role of the boring husband who didn't belong in this sophisticated crowd. It wasn't hard. Half these people were exactly the kind of pretentious posers I'd expected. But I was also watching, listening, and recording. The app on my phone was capturing every conversation within 15 feet, and I was making mental notes about who was talking to whom, who seemed to know about Julia and Damian's relationship, and who was just along for the free wine. "Simon works with computers," Julia explained to a woman named Tasha, who I recognized from Julia's descriptions as the office gossip. "Security stuff, very technical." "How fascinating," Tasha said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Do you enjoy it?" "I love catching people who think they're smarter than they are," I replied. "You'd be amazed how many people leave digital footprints without realizing it." Julia's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. "Simon's always been good with details." "Details are everything in my line of work," I agreed. "One small mistake, and everything falls apart." The conversation moved on to other topics. but I noticed Julia was drinking more than usual. By 9 o'clock, she was on her fourth glass of wine and getting that loose, giggly quality that meant she was about to say something she'd regret. "Simon," Damian appeared at my elbow. "Could I show you something upstairs? I've got a home office setup you might find interesting." I followed him up a narrow staircase to the second floor, noting the expensive artwork and the fact that he was leading me away from the party. His office was at the back of the house, overlooking a small garden. It was neat, organized, and completely lacking in personality. "Nice setup," I said, admiring his dual monitor configuration. "What kind of work do you do here?" "Mostly freelance consulting. The agency business doesn't always pay the bills, you know." Interesting. So he was admitting to money problems, at least indirectly. "I can imagine. Julia mentioned you drive a BMW. Those aren't cheap." "Worth every penny, though. Image is important in this business." He was standing by the window now, looking down at the garden. Something in his posture suggested he was working up to something, maybe trying to decide how much to tell me. "Simon," he said finally, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Julia seems unhappy lately." "Does she?" "She works very hard, puts in long hours. Sometimes I think she needs more appreciation at home." I almost laughed. The man was actually trying to justify his affair by suggesting I wasn't treating my wife well enough. The arrogance was breathtaking. "I appreciate Julia plenty," I said mildly. "Maybe more than she realizes." "I'm sure you do. It's just, well, a woman like Julia has needs, emotional needs, financial needs. She deserves the finer things in life." "And you think she's not getting them at home?" "I think she could have more. A lot more." We stared at each other for a moment, the subtext hanging heavy in the air. He was telling me, as directly as he dared, that he could provide things I couldn't. Money, excitement, a lifestyle that my insurance company salary couldn't match. "You're probably right," I said finally. "Julia does deserve more. The question is, what's she willing to do to get it?" Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, that I wasn't rising to the bait. He'd expected anger, jealousy, maybe even a confrontation. Instead, I was agreeing with him, which seemed to confuse him. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I just thought you should know how valuable she is. To the agency, I mean." "Oh, I know exactly how valuable Julia is." We went back downstairs to find the party winding down. Several people had already left, and the remaining guests were making those polite noises that meant they were ready to go home. Julia was sitting on the couch, looking flushed and slightly disheveled. Tasha was next to her, whispering something that made Julia giggle. "There you are," Julia said when she saw me. Damian was showing Simon his office setup. "Very impressive," I agreed. "Though I noticed you've got some security vulnerabilities in your network configuration." Damian looked startled. "Security vulnerabilities?" "Nothing major. Your wireless network is using WEP encryption instead of WPA2. Makes it easy for someone to intercept your data if they know what they're doing." I had no idea. Most people don't. You'd be surprised how much personal information gets transmitted over unsecured networks, emails, text messages, financial data, all just floating around in digital space waiting for someone to grab it. Julia was staring at me now, her wine-flushed face suddenly pale. She might be drunk, but she wasn't stupid. She understood exactly what I was telling them. "We should probably get going," she said, standing up unsteadily. "Early morning tomorrow." "Of course," Damian said, but he was looking at me with new wariness. "Thanks for coming, Simon. Very educational. Thanks for having me. I learned a lot." The drive home was quiet. Julia stared out the passenger window while I navigated the narrow streets of the historic district. I could practically hear her thinking, trying to figure out how much I knew and what I planned to do about it. "Nice party," I said finally. Damian seems like an interesting guy. Very ambitious." "He's good at his job." I'm sure he is, though I got the impression he might be having some financial difficulties. All that talk about image and expensive cars usually means someone's living beyond their means. Julia turned to look at me. What makes you say that? Professional instinct. In my line of work, you learn to spot people who are taking risks they can't afford. It's usually a sign they're getting desperate. Desperate for what? Money? Security? A way out of whatever hole they've dug themselves into. Julia was quiet for the rest of the drive. When we got home, she went straight upstairs, claiming she had a headache. I heard her in the bathroom, running water and moving around restlessly. Then the bedroom door closed, and the house went quiet. I waited 20 minutes, then went down to my basement office. Time to review the evening's intelligence and plan the next phase of my operation. The recording app had captured over 3 hours of conversation, including several interesting exchanges between Julia and Tasha about making changes and taking control of your life. There was also a brief conversation between Damian and another man about investment opportunities and liquid assets. But the most interesting recording was from upstairs, when Damian and I were alone in his office. His comments about Julia's needs and his ability to provide for her were now preserved digitally, along with his admission that the agency business wasn't paying his bills. I opened a new document and began typing, Operation Birthday Surprise, Phase 5, The End Game. Everything was falling into place. Julia and Damian thought they were playing me, but they were actually playing themselves. All I had to do now was give them enough rope to hang themselves with, and I had just the rope in mind. Monday morning brought news that changed everything. I was sitting at my desk at Hartwell Insurance, pretending to work on a security audit while actually planning my wife's public humiliation, when Greg appeared with a manila folder and a grim expression. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." We went to the break room, where Greg spread the contents of his folder across a small table. Bank statements, insurance documents, and what looked like legal paperwork. "I dug deeper into your wife's finances," he said quietly. "Simon, she's not just stealing from your joint account. She's been forging your signature on documents." I stared at the papers in front of me. My signature appeared on several forms I'd never seen before, including a life insurance policy increase and a beneficiary change on my retirement account. "When did this happen?" I asked. "The insurance policy was filed 3 weeks ago. The retirement account change was submitted last Friday, right after that party at Damian's place." My hands were shaking as I picked up the insurance documents. The policy amount had been increased from $200,000 to $500,000, with Julia listed as the sole beneficiary. The forged signature was good. She'd obviously practiced, but I could see subtle differences in the pen pressure and letter formation. "There's more," Greg continued. "I did some checking on Damian Sutter's background. He's not just broke. He's got connections to some questionable people. His ex-business partner was investigated for insurance fraud 2 years ago." "Investigated or convicted?" "Investigated. Nothing was proven, but the pattern is interesting. Rich guy gets in financial trouble, takes out large life insurance policies on business partners, then unfortunate accidents start happening." I felt cold despite the warm break room. "You think they're planning to have me removed?" "I think you need to be very, very careful, and I think you need to move fast." That evening, I sat in my basement office staring at the evidence Greg had compiled. The forged signatures, the insurance policy, the background information on Damian's associates. It painted a picture that was both clear and terrifying. Julia wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to collect on my life insurance policy. The question was, how far were they willing to go? I heard footsteps on the basement stairs and quickly closed the folder. Julia appeared in the doorway, wearing a bathrobe and carrying a cup of tea. "Working late again?" she asked. "Just finishing up some reports." She came closer, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, the expensive stuff she'd started wearing recently. "Simon, we need to talk." "About what?" "About us. About our marriage." She sat down in the chair across from my desk, crossing her legs carefully. In the harsh light of the basement, I could see the calculation in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about what we both want out of life, whether we're really happy together. Are you happy, Julia? I could be happier. We both could." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. "What would make you happier?" "Freedom, financial security, the chance to really live instead of just existing." "And you don't think we have that now?" "Do we? Look around, Simon. This house, this life, it's all so ordinary. Don't you want more?" "I want a lot of things," I said carefully. "But I've learned that wanting and getting are two different things." "They don't have to be." Julia leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "There are opportunities out there, Simon. Ways to change our situation dramatically." "What kind of opportunities?" "Investment opportunities. Damian has connections, people who can help us make real money. But it requires taking some risks." "What kind of risks?" She hesitated, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. "The kind that pay off big if you're smart about them. And if you're not smart about them, then you stay trapped in the same boring life forever." We stared at each other across my desk, and I realized this was the moment of truth. Julia was making her pitch, trying to get me to agree to whatever scheme she and Damian had cooked up. The question was, how much was she willing to reveal? "These investment opportunities," I said slowly, "do they require me to sign anything?" "Maybe. Some paperwork, legal documents, nothing complicated." "Life insurance paperwork?" Julia's face went very still. "Why would you ask that?" "Just curious. Seems like the kind of thing financial advisors always push. More life insurance, bigger policies. It's just smart planning, Simon, protecting your family's future." "Our family's future." "Of course. Our future." But she'd hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. In Julia's mind, our future didn't include me being alive to enjoy it. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." After Julia went back upstairs, I sat in the darkness of my basement office and made my decision. Tomorrow, I would spring my trap. But first, I needed to make sure I survived long enough to enjoy the results. I picked up my phone and called Greg. "It's time," I said when he answered. "Tomorrow morning, we end this." "You sure you're ready?" "I'm sure. But Greg, if something happens to me in the next 24 hours, make sure the police get copies of everything we've compiled." "Nothing's going to happen to you, Simon. We won't let it." I hoped he was right. But as I climbed the stairs to rejoin my wife, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into the final act of a play where I didn't know how it was supposed to end. The only thing I knew for certain was that tomorrow, one way or another, the truth would come out. And Julia was going to discover that her boring, ordinary husband was full of surprises. Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that cut through your coat and reminded you that winter was coming. I sat in my car outside Morrison & Associates, watching employees arrive for work and checking my phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Everything was in place. Greg was stationed across the street with a camera. The recording equipment was running. The evidence files had been copied and distributed to 3 different locations. And in exactly 1 hour, Julia and Damian were going to get the surprise of their lives. At 9:45 a.m., I walked into the Morrison & Associates lobby. The receptionist, a young woman with pink hair and multiple piercings, looked up from her computer with practiced enthusiasm. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Julia Callahan. I'm her husband." "Oh, how sweet. She's in a meeting right now, but I can let her know you're here." Actually, I'd prefer to surprise her. Could you tell me which conference room? The receptionist hesitated, clearly torn between being helpful and following protocol. Well, I'm not supposed to. It's our anniversary, I lied smoothly. I brought flowers. I held up the bouquet I'd purchased that morning, a dozen red roses that had cost more than I usually spent on groceries. The receptionist melted immediately. Oh, that's so romantic. Conference room B, second floor, but they're in a really important client meeting. I'll be quick. I took the elevator to the second floor, my heart pounding with anticipation. Through the glass walls of conference room B, I could see Julia and Damian sitting close together at a polished table. They weren't meeting with a client. They were alone, and from their body language, they weren't discussing business. I pushed open the door without knocking. Surprise, I said. Julia jumped like she'd been shocked. Damian leaned back in his chair, his face cycling through several expressions before settling on fake friendliness. Simon, Julia stammered. What are you doing here? Bringing my wife flowers, I said, setting the bouquet on the conference table. And having a little chat with both of you. This isn't really a good time, Damian said, starting to stand. We're in the middle of... Sit down, I said quietly. Something in my tone made him comply immediately. I closed the conference room door and activated the privacy glass, a nice touch that would keep our conversation from being observed by the rest of the office. Then I sat down across from them and pulled out my phone. I want to play you something, I said, opening the recording app. A conversation from last Friday night. Damian's voice filled the room. She works very hard, puts in long hours. Sometimes I think she needs more appreciation at home. Then my voice. I appreciate Julia plenty, maybe more than she realizes. Then Damian again. A woman like Julia has needs, emotional needs, financial needs. She deserves the finer things in life. I stopped the recording and looked at their faces. Julia was pale, but Damian looked more angry than scared. You recorded us? He said. That's illegal. Actually, it's not. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state, which means as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's perfectly legal. I should know. I work in security. What do you want? Julia asked. I want the truth. About your relationship. About the money you've been stealing. About the life insurance policies you've been forging my signature on. Julia's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. I pulled out the manila folder Greg had given me and spread its contents across the conference table. Bank statements showing transfers from our joint account to your private savings. Credit card bills for hotels and restaurants. And my personal favorite, the life insurance policy increase with my forged signature. Damian was studying the documents with professional interest. These could be faked. They could be. But they're not. Just like your financial situation isn't as rosy as you pretend. 6-figure credit card debt, alimony payments that are crushing you, and a business that's barely breaking even. You need money, Damian, badly. Everyone needs money, he said carefully, but not everyone is willing to commit insurance fraud to get it. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Julia was staring at the documents spread across the table, her face cycling through denial, anger, and fear. You're crazy, she said finally. You're paranoid and crazy and right, I finished, about all of it. The affair, the money, the plan to collect on my life insurance. The only question is, how far were you planning to go? Damian stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. Julia, we don't have to listen to this. Sit down, I said again, and this time there was no mistaking the authority in my voice. We're not finished. You can't keep us here, Damian protested, but he sat down anyway. I'm not keeping you anywhere. You're free to leave any time you want. But if you do, copies of all this evidence go to the police, the insurance company, and the state licensing board. Your choice. Julia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. Simon, please. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. I was going to leave you, she said through her tears. I was going to file for divorce. The money. I was just trying to make sure I had something to start over with. And the life insurance policy? That was Damian's idea. He said it was just smart planning in case something happened. In case something happened, or in case you made something happen? We would never… Julia started, then stopped. Never what? Never actually go through with it? Or never get caught? Damian was looking at Julia with something that might have been disgust. She's telling the truth, he said. We were planning to wait for the divorce to be final before… Before what? Before we got married, Julia finished. We were going to do this the right way. I almost laughed. The right way? By stealing my money and forging my signature on legal documents? We were going to pay you back, Damian said weakly. With what money? You're broke, remember? The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Julia's crying. Through the privacy glass, I could see other employees going about their morning routines, completely unaware of the drama playing out 20 feet away. Here's what's going to happen, I said finally. Julia, you're going to transfer every penny you stole back to our joint account, today. Then you're going to call the insurance company and reverse that policy change, claiming you made a mistake. And if I don't? Then I file a police report for forgery and theft, and I send copies of our recorded conversations to your boss, your clients, and anyone else who might be interested in your business practices. I turned to Damian. As for you, you're going to stay away from my wife, permanently. No more lunches, no more text messages, no more private meetings. She's off limits. You can't control what Julia does, he said. No, but I can control what happens to you if you keep interfering in my marriage. Remember, I work in security. I know how to make people's lives very complicated. Damian's face was flushed with anger, but he nodded reluctantly. Good, I said, standing up. I'm glad we understand each other. I gathered up the documents and put them back in the folder. Julia was still crying, but more quietly now. Damian was staring out the window, probably calculating how much this was going to cost him. One more thing, I said, pausing at the conference room door. If anything happens to me, anything at all, Greg has instructions to turn everything over to the authorities, so I'd suggest you both be very careful about any future plans you might be making. I left them sitting in the conference room and walked back to the elevator. The receptionist with pink hair smiled at me as I passed. Did she like the flowers? She asked. She was speechless, I replied. Outside, Greg was waiting by my car with a satisfied expression. How did it go? Better than expected. I think they got the message. Think they'll try anything else? I doubt it. They're both too scared and too smart to risk it now. We drove back to Hartwell Insurance in comfortable silence. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd planned, but I felt oddly empty. 3 months of planning, weeks of gathering evidence, and it was over in 20 minutes. So what now? Greg asked as we pulled into the parking lot. Now I figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life. Divorce? Probably, but on my terms this time. That evening, I sat in my basement office and opened a new document. At the top of the page, I typed, Operation Birthday Surprise, Final Report. Then I began writing the story of how an ordinary IT security specialist had outmaneuvered his cheating wife and her desperate lover. It was a story about betrayal and revenge, about the power of information, and the importance of thinking 3 steps ahead. But mostly, it was a story about discovering that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply letting people destroy themselves. I finished typing and saved the document. Upstairs, I could hear Julia moving around, probably packing. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation at her office, but we both knew our marriage was over. Tomorrow, I would start figuring out what came next. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally sleep peacefully. The trap had been sprung, the truth had been revealed, and justice had been served. My 39th birthday surprise was complete.